The first light of dawn had barely crept over the ridge when I turned off the county road and onto my gravel drive, a strip of earth I'd fought 2 decades to call mine. But the moment my eyes hit the meadow below, my chest tightened. It wasn't peace waiting for me, it was chaos. A sprawl of tents stretched like some neon rash across the grass. Strangers dragging coolers and fire pits, kids darting after dogs. And at the center of it all stood Karen, visor flashing, sunglasses too big for her face, waving like a queen. Greeting her loyal court. The snap of realization hit me like a sprung steel trap. This was my land, my fences, my sanctuary. And 50 uninvited guests had stormed it as if it were the opening act of a summer festival. My pulse quickened, not with fear, but with a cold, calculating thrill. Because I already knew how this ended. They didn't know about the gate. They didn't know about the cameras. And they certainly didn't know I was already watching from the ridge. I eased the truck out of sight, killed the engine, and stared down at Karen playing hostess, clipboard in hand, barking orders as though she were leading troops into battle. I remembered her last stunt, a so-called community hike that ended with stolen goats and picnic tables shoved against my property line. Back then, I'd settled for a polite warning. This time, she'd gone too far. Pulling out my phone, I flipped through the hidden camera feeds. Wide shots, close-ups, all of them showing her directing families to raise tents, dig a fire pit, string tarps. Even faint music carried up to me, a playlist far too cheerful for the storm that was brewing. I grinned. This wasn't going to be an argument on a porch. This was chess. And I had already claimed checkmate. Driving down toward the gate, I slowed at the choke point between 2 granite boulders. The reinforced steel gate gleamed forest green, blending perfectly into the pines. I alone carried the master key. As I rolled past the meadow, a few campers glanced up curiously. Karen spotted me too. She raised her hand in that fake friendly wave of hers, defiance hidden beneath the sugar. I didn't return it. Instead, I rolled down my window and called out, loud enough for all to hear, "You're trespassing on private property." The words hit her like a slap. Her smile faltered, her visor dipped, but she quickly flicked her hand as if dismissing me. Something about community rights and a shared easement. I almost laughed. Easement, what a joke. I parked, stepped out, and with deliberate calm swung the steel gate shut. The bar slid through, the padlock snapped, and the echo of that click rolled across the valley like a judge's gavel. Karen's voice cracked as she demanded to know what I was doing. A handful of her guests froze mid-task, watching. I gave no answer. I climbed back into the truck, backed up to the overlook, killed the engine, and settled in. From there, I could see it all. The half-built tents, the forced smiles, the cracks already spreading through her performance. It took less than a minute for her to break. She sprinted to the gate, tugged, rattled, tried to lift the latch. Nothing. 50 people. Piles of gear. And now, sealed inside my land with no way out. My phone buzzed. My lawyer's name lit the screen. I answered with just 2 words. "It's begun." Karen scrambled to rally her crowd, but the edges of control were slipping. Arguments broke out. A child cried. Someone cursed about no cell signal. That was another advantage. I'd chosen this property for its dead zone. The morning dragged on, and I watched their celebration sour. Confidence sagged into tense whispers. Karen shouted about calling the sheriff, her voice cracking against the empty valley. I leaned back against the hood, sipping coffee from my thermos, outwardly calm. Inside, adrenaline thrummed through me. This was a dangerous game. But then I remembered the folder in my glove box: deeds, maps, photos of every posted sign. I was ironclad. And they still didn't know about the motion sensor at the creek crossing. The moment they tried sneaking out, I'd know. By noon, Desperation leaked through their charade. A grill sputtered to life, music blared louder, but no one was fooled. The heat baked the meadow, kids whined, adults muttered into useless phones. Karen's visor now looked like a crown tilted on a fading monarch. I opened the glove box, spread out my documents across the dashboard, and studied them like battle plans. Through binoculars, I caught 3 men trudging toward the rear fence, only to be swallowed by the swamp beyond. They returned drenched and silent. By late afternoon, the meadow shimmered with heat, and even the most loyal campers looked broken. Karen called a meeting under a tarp, but half ignored her. I watched from my perch, patient as stone. Because in a standoff, patience isn't just a weapon, it's the winning move. I sat on the hood, legs against the hot steel, and smiled faintly. The next step was coming, and it would be mine. Should I confront them again, lay out the rules, or simply let the situation simmer until they snapped? The last option was tempting. The night after I locked the gate felt like sitting in a private balcony watching a terrible play unfold. Darkness settled over the valley and 50 lanterns lit the meadow like a misplaced carnival. The laughter and chatter had gone brittle, edged with frustration. I lay awake in the cabin, still dressed, nursing black coffee and listening to muffled voices carried on the night breeze. Around midnight, a shout cut through, followed by a crashing sound, probably a cooler or a folding chair hitting the ground. I smiled not cruelly, but because I could already see the arc of their morale snapping downward. Groups fracture fast when comfort and assumptions are stripped away. I'd watched it happen in courts and campsites alike. I thought of Karen trying to hold together the little empire she'd built on my land, an empire now boxed in behind steel and shadow. At sunrise, I made my presence known without starting a fight. I drove down to the gate and parked where everyone could see me but not reach me. A cluster of campers huddled nearby, faces pale from a bad night. Karen emerged from a sagging tent, visor crooked, hair flattened, sunglasses hiding tired eyes. She called that she wanted to negotiate. I raised a hand and stayed silent. The quiet carried more weight than any speech. A few men shook the locked fence and a woman begged for the children to be let out. Someone muttered about calling the police. Karen snapped that she had it under control, her confidence already fraying. My phone buzzed. My lawyer confirming he'd spoken with the sheriff. Legally, I was solid. This wasn't kidnapping or false imprisonment, it was trespass. Technically, they could walk off my land if they wanted, but with vehicles and gear on my side of the gate, no one would risk it. Leverage. I started filming short clips, Karen gesturing. Crowds arguing because documentation would be my best friend later. By late morning, Karen tried a new tactic, swaggering to the gate with a sheet of paper and declaring she held a decades-old right-of-way easement. I almost laughed. I'd spent years and a small fortune removing that loophole from my deed. I called out that she could show a signed court order, otherwise she was trespassing. From 50 feet away, I could see the paper was just a county printout, nothing binding. Campers muttered and a few snickered. The authority she'd tried to perform was sliding off her. After lunch, I tightened the screws. I unlocked a small outbuilding and let 2 of my cattle dogs loose to patrol the fence. They weren't vicious, but they barked and circled, making the campers uneasy, especially the parents. I strolled the fence line like a rancher doing chores, nodding and shrugging each time Karen demanded something. Her fury grew obvious. She stamped her foot like a child denied a toy. Heat built and the crowd began to splinter. Small groups packed gear and attempted to leave, only to discover the marshy, treacherous terrain beyond the creek. They came back scratched, sweaty, and angrier at Karen. A man in a red bandana begged me to let his truck out. He'd been invited by a friend and didn't realize it was private property. I told him calmly the sheriff would sort things out tomorrow and no vehicles would move until then. He cursed and stalked back to his tent. By evening, Karen scrambled for a signal, climbing onto her SUV roof, waving her phone like a talisman. Each return from the creek left her more frustrated. I filmed it all. Documentation had morphed into comedy gold. As night two deepened, panic started to seep through. Food was being rationed, whispers turned frantic, children cried louder. Someone shouted about calling a brother with bolt cutters. Others tried to shut him down. Faith in Karen was cracking fast. I let them stew another hour before driving down again and leaning against the fence like a man having a smoke. The silence that followed felt electric. People quieted as if called to attention. Karen approached, voice trembling but trying for firmness. She offered money to open the gate, called it a misunderstanding, said I was embarrassing myself. I held up my phone showing time-stamped videos and the ignored no trespassing signs. Her shoulders slumped. For the first time, I saw real fear. I climbed back into the truck and drove off, leaving them to the barking dogs and their own confusion. That night, sitting on my porch staring at the ridge, I balanced how far to push this. I could end it now, open the gate, bill them for cleanup, and be done. Or I could let consequences accumulate until Karen felt them from 50 voices demanding answers. The sheriff supported me, and the legal path was clear. I didn't want to humiliate people for sport. These were human beings, after all, but I wanted the boundary re-established. I chose to wait one more day. Morning 3 arrived colder and sharper, the meadow breathing thin mist as the campers rose on my side of the gate. I woke before dawn and sat at the kitchen table, enjoying the inside calm while imagining the breakdown below, dwindling food, frayed tempers, and a leader losing her grip. The chessboard was set. Each move prepared the next. This wasn't about revenge. It was about restoring what they'd ignored, and yes, there was a little satisfaction watching Karen's arrogance unravel. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to Listen HOA. Stories for more shocking neighborhood battles you won't believe. I laced up my boots that morning with one thought in mind. Today was the day I'd let the pressure crush them into revealing their own cracks. From the ridge above the meadow, the so-called retreat looked more like the aftermath of a hurricane than a getaway. Tents sagged, blankets hung over car windows, and trash scattered across the wet grass. At the center of the chaos, Karen clutched her clipboard like a lifeline, barking orders at campers who had clearly stopped listening. Some had marched straight to the gate, rattling the bars, muttering about bolt cutters or calling in the National Guard. I parked out of sight, steadied my breath, and descended with deliberate calm, the kind that had unsettled them since day one. Silence swept the meadow like prey sensing a predator. The man in the red bandana stepped forward again, pleading about hungry families and crying kids. I reminded him, flat and cold, that they were trespassers. The sheriff was already on his way, and this was the price of ignoring posted warnings. His face darkened. Karen tried to seize control, shouting that I was bluffing, waving her legal advice around like it meant something. I smiled, pulled out my phone, and let the sheriff's voicemail play loud enough for all to hear. He'd be here after lunch to supervise their exit and hand out citations. The murmur of the crowd shifted, eyes darting to Karen with growing suspicion. I turned my back and started to leave them stewing when shouts erupted near the creek. 4 men had tried sneaking out through the marsh, only to sink knee-deep in muck. Their rescue attempt turned into a clumsy comedy of splashing and slipping. Karen rushed over to take charge but lost her footing, tumbling into the mud as her visor flew. Laughter rippled through the group before fading into awkward silence. Another crack in her crumbling authority. Later, I returned with my truck. Didn't even step out, just honked and held up a laminated aerial map showing every legal boundary and posted sign. The pale look on Karen's face said it all. Campers began shouting questions at her. Did she even have permission to bring them here? Where were their refunds? Suddenly, it wasn't me versus them. It was all of them versus her. By late morning, the shouting from their camp carried all the way to my porch. Around noon, I spotted a few trying to flag down a passing truck, but the driver sped off, clearly unwilling to get involved. Then the sky darkened. A storm rolled in with thunder rumbling over the hills. I rode back to the gate in my old ranch coat, calm as ever. Rain started to fall as I told them plainly. The sheriff would be here within the hour, so pack up and anyone who left trash would pay extra fines. Karen tried to speak but faltered when glares silenced her. By the time the sheriff's vehicle rolled up through the downpour, campers were cheering like prisoners awaiting release. He parked on my side, shook my hand, and surveyed the mess. Karen rushed forward, babbling excuses, but he cut her off with a raised hand. After scanning the documents I handed him, he addressed the crowd. They were trespassing, citations would be issued, and they'd leave only under his supervision. And just like that, the storm outside mirrored the storm that had finally broken inside their camp. Crowd's groan rolled across the rain like another thunderclap. Standing there under the downpour while the sheriff took charge, I felt a strange blend of vindication and relief. The standoff was ending exactly how I'd engineered it. Karen stood shivering, mascara running in rivulets down her face as the deputy told her she'd be financially liable for any damage and for bringing that crowd onto my land. Her protests were cut off by his flat, professional tone. One by one the campers pulled past me, some shooting hateful looks, others muttering apologies or shaking their heads at Karen. The storm washed away the last footprints and flattened the party trash, but it couldn't erase the unsettled feeling that settled over my property in the days that followed. Rain clears the air, but it doesn't erase what's been started. The fourth morning I walked the perimeter, checking fence lines and noting trampled grass, abandoned coolers, and a collapsed fire ring. The sheriff's citations were in order and served. Karen had driven off with her jaw set. I'd humiliated her and stripped away her control, but I know humiliation breeds revenge faster than dry brush catches fire. While patching a ripped fence near the creek, I spotted fresh, smaller footprints heading into the trees tracks that weren't mine, angled oddly as though someone had skirted the property at night. I crouched and brushed my fingers over the wet soil, feeling the tread. A chill ran through me. Someone had been back after the storm. I trailed the prints a few yards until they vanished into the underbrush, and my mind ran through the possibilities, scouting for another entrance, planting evidence to start a complaint, or setting up a hidden camera. All of it meant the business wasn't finished. At the cabin I pulled up the camera feeds. Sure enough, at 3:26 a.m., a blurry figure slipped along the north boundary and melted into the trees after a few minutes. The image was grainy, but the gait and frame were familiar. Karen in a hooded jacket. I leaned back and let out a low whistle. She was testing me. That afternoon, I met my lawyer to review the paperwork again, making sure the citations and reports were watertight. He told me to stay calm and keep documenting. While we were talking, he mentioned offhand that Karen had been calling county offices, claiming I'd unlawfully imprisoned her guests and threatening to seek an injunction. I almost laughed until I pictured how easily public outrage can be weaponized. I needed to stay 2 steps ahead. On the drive home, I stopped at the feed store and picked up solar motion lights and an extra memory card. By dusk, the valley looked like it had been washed in gold. By night, my nerves hummed with a low current of tension. I installed the lights along the main gate and the path to the creek. The dogs resumed their patrols, ears flicking at every twig snap. I brewed thick coffee and waited on the porch. Around midnight, a shadow crossed the far field. I didn't move. Through binoculars, I watched the figure approach the gate, fumble at the base, and slip back into the trees. The motion light beam picked out a flash of a distinctive jacket before the darkness swallowed it. She'd been there less than a minute, but it was enough. In the morning, a cheap padlock dangled from my gate with a handwritten note taped to it, an absurd claim of communal access and a bluff about lawsuits. She wasn't only furious. She was plotting. I decided to flip the script. I called a local reporter I trusted and invited him to the property to document the trespass. He came with camera and notebook. I walked him through the damage, handed over the citations, and showed him the nighttime footage. He whistled and took pictures. I knew Karen would be reading about herself in black and white before long. This was no longer just defense of my land. It was narrative control. That evening, as twilight bled into the hills, I saw Karen on the county road beyond the gate, binoculars in hand. Two generals on opposite ridgelines sizing each other up after a skirmish. I raised my coffee in a mock salute. She lowered hers and turned away, but the posture said it all. She was seething. Our conflict had shifted from open trespass into shadow games, a patient contest of leverage. The next morning I reinforced boundaries, filed an updated trespass notice with the sheriff, printed new warning signs, and ordered extra trail cameras to cover blind spots. Every step was another chess move, another message that I wouldn't be worn down. The dog stuck close, barking at anything that moved. At noon, a delivery arrived with the new equipment. A car idled on the ridge. Karen's SUV. She didn't come down, but she made sure I saw her watching. I walked the far edge of my property and found a small plastic flag with an orange ribbon stuck in the pocket. Ground surveyor-type markers. My stomach tightened. Was she planting fake claims or quietly marking a boundary? I photographed it and filed it with the sheriff. That night I lay awake, watching motion lights blink as deer passed and waiting for the human shadow I knew would show itself eventually. Around 2 in the morning, a lone silhouette crept along the fence line. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped onto the porch. The figure froze and bolted into the trees. The dogs chased, but I called them back before they crossed the property line. The very next afternoon, while repairing a post, I found fresh footprints leading into the woods. The same pattern, the same short stride. Karen or one of her cronies had been back again. I followed the tracks until they faded and then checked the camera logs. Another blurry figure at 3:26 a.m., the pattern was clear. She was probing, testing, trying to push me into making a mistake. That day I rode into town, consulted with my lawyer, and picked up new gear trail cameras, extra memory cards, solar lights, and then invited a town reporter to see the evidence. He left shaking his head and promising to run a piece. When he published, the story put the facts in print, trespass, citations, and a late-night return to the property caught on video. Karen responded by watching my property from the ridge, arms folded, anger coiled tight. The tension moved into a new phase. No more broad public stunts. Now the play was quieter. Flags, surreptitious returns, thinly veiled threats. I tightened the legal news, filed another report, posted clearer signs, and posted chase cameras where the trees made blind spots. The dogs patrolled like sentries. Each small step was another move in the game. Make the record unassailable, make any escalation obvious, and keep the moral high ground. One afternoon I found a little plastic ribbon tied to a sapling by the creek. A surveyor's marker, out of place. Someone was either trying to fake a claim or test the county's response. I photographed it and filed it. That night the lone silhouette returned and bolted again when my light hit it. Morning brought a cheap padlock on my gate and a note. Childish, but dangerous in intent. I chose to shape the narrative before she could. The small town paper ran my account of trespassers and returned power to facts. I watched Karen on the road beyond the gate, watching me watch her. We'd moved from open confrontation to a cold contest, each of us trying to force the other into an error, kept reinforcing the boundaries, legal filings, better cameras, more signage. The dog's vigilance increased. The Ridge car returned occasionally, engine idling. The surveyor flag was still out by the creek. I beefed up surveillance and filed the new evidence. Every night I watched the meadow and waited for the shadow. When it came, I shone the light and it vanished into the trees again. This story wasn't over. She'd tested the gate. She'd come back in the dark. Now the game was to keep collecting proof, to keep pressing every legal advantage until she had nowhere left to hide. The chessboard was set. The next move would decide whether she'd escalate or fold, and I was ready. My pulse thundered, but a dark satisfaction settled in my chest. Karen had grown desperate, reckless enough to risk being caught on camera again. Dawn bled into the valley under a blanket of fog, the kind that swallows sound and makes every step feel like a secret. When I traced the fence line, I spotted fresh prints. The orange marker ripped away and a note pinned to my warning sign, her threat to sue for access. I tore it down calmly and slid it into the swelling folder of evidence. This was no longer a land dispute. It was morphing into a slow burn thriller, each day unmasking a new move from my antagonist. Yet my resolve stayed steady. This was my land, my sanctuary, my life's work. I would defend it not with fury, but with patience, with documentation, with relentless steadiness. The fifth day rose under a sky so brilliantly blue it mocked me, as if the world was blind to the private war spilling across my ridgeline and into courthouse files now bearing both our names. I was sipping coffee when the dogs erupted, barking toward the main gate. A battered van idled on the county road, new, not Karen's SUV. Two men emerged, unloading tripods, measuring tapes, clipboards. They moved with crisp efficiency, ignoring my no trespassing signs like ink was powerless against them. My chest tightened. Surveyors. Karen had escalated the battle into legal terrain. I rolled down in my truck, gravel snapping under the tires, and confronted them from behind the gate's steel mesh. They claimed Karen authorized their work, that she had rights of access. Flatly, I told them they were trespassing, and the sheriff had standing orders to clear unauthorized persons. Only when I phoned him directly did they hesitate. 20 minutes later, the deputy's truck crested the ridge. By the time the exchange was over, the surveyors were retreating, their van disappearing in a cloud of dust, eyes darting nervously. I watched them leave with cold satisfaction, yet I knew Karen would twist this into another narrative. Back at the cabin, I spread out maps, deeds, photos. The sheer weight of paper felt like armor, a shield between me and her creeping entitlement. It was surreal. Days ago, I had been tending the quiet rhythm of my land. Now it had become a stage set for a conflict with the makings of a headline war. My phone buzzed. The local paper had run the article. The campsite photos, my quotes, my warnings. Within minutes, comments poured in, supportive, skeptical, divided. One truth remained: Karen's name was out there, branded as the instigator of trespass. That afternoon, a courier arrived with a certified letter. Inside, a fat packet from Karen's lawyer accusing me of harassment, illegal imprisonment, even that my gate violated a public right-of-way. I laughed aloud. The bluster was hollow, the claims flimsy. My lawyer drafted a precise rebuttal, reaffirming the legality of my gate and warning of counterclaims. It was poker Karen bluffing with nothing in hand. But it signaled she wasn't retreating. She was doubling down. As the sun slid west, I made my presence felt. I saddled the ATV and rode my perimeter, dogs loping alongside, tails high, barks echoing through the valley. I hammered in fresh signs, adjusted trail cams. This wasn't just defense anymore. It was performance. a show of vigilance against her theater of entitlement. Mid-circuit, I spotted a tinted SUV parked further up the road. It didn't move. Whoever sat inside was watching. Later, chili simmered on the stove, onions and peppers filling the kitchen while the radio hummed. I thought of my father. He'd taught me to hold land through droughts, debts, disputes. Property isn't just soil, he used to say. It's your spine. Let someone push you off once, and you'll never stand straight again. His words rooted me as dusk thickened by evening. The reporter emailed Karen had refused comment, instead unleashing a furious rant online. Screenshots showed her branding me a vigilante, warning families that rural owners were turning militant. It was exactly the narrative I'd predicted. I forwarded everything to my lawyer, then sat on the porch watching night bleed into the hills. The dogs grew restless, hackles raised. A faint metallic scent rode the wind. At 10:30, red lights blinked overhead a drone. Karen had escalated to aerial surveillance. I filmed it until it vanished toward the road. Another entry for the evidence folder. Another escalation. By midnight, stars cut sharp against the sky. Fatigue pressed heavy, but beneath it coiled stubborn resolve. This was my land. My work. My fight. 50 campers might spin me as villain or hero, but Karen was scrambling to stitch her story from scraps of humiliation. Before bed, I walked one last circuit with a flashlight. At the gate, I stood listening. The night hummed with echoes of her voice demanding entry. The road lay silent, the hills brooding. This wasn't over. It was evolving. Chapter 5 closed not with resolution, but with the tightening coil of a greater storm just over the horizon. The 6th day broke with engines humming down the road. My dogs growled at the window. When I stepped onto the porch, dawn air thrummed with a convoy led by Karen's SUV. Headlights pierced the fog. She wasn't prowling anymore. She was marching in like a general leading her army for war. Out came folding tables, tripods, and a handful of people clutching clipboards and phones. This wasn't just trespassing. It was theater, staged to paint me as the villain. I slipped on my jacket and walked toward the gate with deliberate calm, hands visible, face unreadable. The dogs flanked me, low growls rumbling, tails stiff. Karen's voice blared through a bullhorn, echoing across the valley. She was live streaming, branding herself a victim of persecution at the hands of a rogue landowner. Cameras swung my way, lenses glittering like the cold eyes of insects. She rattled off a rehearsed speech about community rights and rural oppression, but her voice trembled when I lifted my folder of deeds and court notices, holding it high without a word. One of her men shoved a mic through the bars, but I stepped back, keeping steel between us. The crowd behind her was smaller than the mob of campers, maybe a dozen in all, but louder, more intense diehards or hired agitators. They chanted about public land, ignoring the private property signs right in front of them. Karen's voice rang again through the bullhorn, accusing me of erecting illegal fences and blocking a historic trail. I pulled out my phone, switched on the camera, and filmed them calmly, narrating each moment for the record. My lawyer had warned me. Karen would try to bait me into a spectacle. I wasn't about to give her what she wanted. For 20 long minutes, the shouting swelled. Fists rattled the gate, insults hurled like rocks. I leaned against the fence post, coffee in hand, silent. When the sheriff's lights flashed down the road, relief flickered, though I kept my expression neutral. He strode to me first, asked if I was all right. I handed over my stack photos of Karen sneaking onto my land, the surveyors, the drone. He flipped through them, his jaw tightening. Then he turned on Karen. His voice cut sharp, ordering her to disperse. She tried to argue, but he shut her down, warning the next citation would become a criminal charge. Cameras drank in every second. Her face twisted, part rage, part panic as her plan collapsed in real time. Not all her followers backed down. A few shouted constitutional slogans, one threatened to climb the gate. The deputy's hand hovered near his cuffs. Silence pressed as the threat of arrest snapped the group back to reality. Finally, Karen ended the performance, her voice cracking as she vowed to fight in court. Tables folded, cameras packed, but not before her people cast lingering glares my way. When the last of their engines faded, only the low growl of my dogs remained. Back inside, I felt both drained and strangely exhilarated. This had been her boldest strike yet, and I'd walked through it unscathed. Still, my stomach was tight, my hands trembling faintly from the adrenaline. At my desk, I opened my laptop to find dozens of notifications. Clips of the clash were already spreading, some casting me as the steadfast landowner, others twisting her into a martyr. The battlefield had expanded into the digital world where truth bent easily. The afternoon dragged in uneasy quiet. I rode the ATV to the creek and spotted another surveyor's flag wedged in the roots of an oak. Another silent intrusion. I photographed it, ripped it out, and added it to my folder of evidence. The land felt watchful now, alive with tension, as though it understood the fight I was waging for it. By evening, the dry wind carried smoke from somewhere beyond the ridge. I sat on the porch, scrolling through social media. Karen was live again, promising new revelations and painting herself as the harassed victim. The comments split, half mocking her, half cheering. I shut it down, stared across the meadow, and remembered my first day here years ago, the peace, the quiet. Before the HOA wars and before Karen, that memory steadied me like stone beneath my feet. At sunset, my lawyer called. He'd filed a counterclaim for damages and fees, attaching every shred of evidence. He said the judge was leaning toward issuing a restraining order barring Karen from coming within 100 yards of my property. The idea of a boundary etched not just in soil but in law sent a current of relief through me. I thanked him and promised vigilance. Night thickened, heavy with expectation. The dogs wouldn't settle, pacing and pricking their ears at every sound. I sat in the dark, watching motion lights flicker, my heartbeat steady but alert. Just after midnight, a car crept down the road with headlights off. Through binoculars, I caught a lone figure slipping a paper through the bars before vanishing back into the night. At dawn, I retrieved it. A typed note, signed. Karen claimed to have new evidence of an easement and threatened criminal charges if I didn't remove the gate. I folded it, slipped it into the evidence folder without a flicker. This had become a war fought not with fists, but with paper and patience. The seventh day dawned brittle, the air sharp like the pause before a verdict is spoken. At my kitchen table, I stared at the mound of documents, screenshots, photos, my fortress of proof. The dogs lay at my feet, restless but calmer now, as if sensing the siege nearing its end. Outside, the meadow glistened under new sunlight. Days ago, tents had choked it. Now only trampled grass and scattered trash remained, scars of chaos slowly fading. I sipped my coffee and thought of how far this had spiraled, from strangers camping on my land to legal crossfire and viral headlines. By mid-morning, my lawyer called back. The judge had signed the restraining order. Karen was legally barred from approaching within 100 yards, with arrest guaranteed if she defied it. Relief washed over me, sharp but brief. I had won this round, etched my boundary in both earth and law. Yet deep down, I knew Karen wouldn't vanish quietly. People like her never did. Around noon, a courier arrived with another envelope. Inside, a county notice billing Karen personally for the cleanup costs of her unauthorized spectacle, damages calculated from my photographs and the sheriff's report. The tide was turning. But wars like this rarely ended clean. The bill ran into thousands of dollars. I leaned back in my chair, imagining the look on her face when she opened it. For a moment, it felt like the universe had finally begun balancing the ledger. Still, I forced myself not to gloat. She could still appeal, stall, or twist the narrative. My focus had to remain on finishing what I'd started, restoring the land, documenting everything, and staying steady. That afternoon, I took the ATV down to the back fence where the creek curled beneath the pines. The sunlight pierced the canopy in golden shafts, glinting off the wet stones. There, half buried in the mud, I spotted another marker flag snapped clean in half as though someone had stomped on it in frustration. I bagged it, photographed it, and rode back feeling less like a landowner and more like a spy uncovering hidden signals. The dogs loped alongside, tongues out, their energy returning as if they too sensed the storm was passing. Back at the cabin, I began reclaiming the meadow. I picked up trash, dismantled abandoned fire pits, and reseeded the trampled grass. Every action felt like reclaiming a piece of my sanity. The ordeal had begun with shock, surged into battle, and exploded into public spectacle, but now it was shifting into resolution. Still, I knew there was one last twist coming. I felt it in the air, like the low hum before a storm. Toward evening, my phone buzzed. A reporter messaged me. Karen had scheduled a live stream for that night, promising to reveal the real truth about me and my land. I shook my head. Another fiction. Another performance, but I decided to be ready. I set my camera on the porch, prepared to record any violation. The dogs settled near the steps, ears pricked toward the gate. The air grew heavier, charged like a coiled spring. Then headlights appeared. Karen's SUV. She parked just beyond the boundary, her face lit by the glow of a phone screen. Another car arrived. Then another. Strangers stepped out with cameras pointed at my property. Not an invasion this time, but a stage. A final act. Karen finally emerged, dressed sharp like a news anchor, phone in hand, voice raised to an online audience. She spoke about bullies and public access, gesturing dramatically toward my land but never crossing the invisible line of the restraining order. Her voice carried, loud but strained. Her supporters clapped, thin and unconvincing. I didn't move. I simply raised my own phone and filmed from the porch, silent and steady. The contrast was stark, her frenzy against my calm. After half an hour, her performance fizzled. She climbed back into her SUV, and one by one, the others followed. The road fell silent again, broken only by crickets and the wind in the pines. Watching their taillights vanish, I felt a wave of quiet satisfaction. She had staged her last grandstand without stepping 1 foot onto my land. The lines had held. The evidence was recorded. Inside, I poured a drink and sat at the desk, files neatly stacked. Evidence backed by law. Law backed by patience. And patience backed by a single, undeniable truth. The land was mine. No performance could change that. The dogs curled up by the stove, finally at ease. Outside, the meadow lay quiet under the rising moon, a scar beginning to heal. Before bed, I walked down to the gate. The steel bar was cool beneath my hand. For days it had been the battleground between entitlement and ownership, spectacle and steadiness. Now it stood locked, peaceful, its drama fading into echoes. The night was still. The valley stretched into shadow. Only the stars bore witness as I turned back up the hill, boots crunching on gravel like the slow closing credits of a film. For the first time since it began, I felt the refuge return to me. Chapter 7 ended not with confrontation, but with the quiet satisfaction of a boundary finally respected and the knowledge that the real reckoning awaited in court, not at my gate. The next morning dawned with a muted calm. The siege was over. The meadow was scarred, but already pushing back with green shoots. The dogs trotted the fence line without tension, as if they too felt the change. Step by step, bag by gag, I reclaimed the land. By mid-morning, the phone rang. It was my lawyer and update on the filings. And with that, Chapter 8 began. The restraining order held firm. Karen had been billed for cleanup costs and trespass damages, and the court date was set for the following week. My lawyer sounded almost cheerful as he explained her attorney had tried to withdraw, citing irreconcilable differences, a polite way of saying she had become too volatile to handle. I thanked him, hung up, and allowed myself a small smile. It wasn't gloating, more like pressure finally bleeding out of a sealed chamber. For the first time since this began, the law itself was doing the heavy lifting. That afternoon, a delivery arrived from a seed company I had ordered weeks earlier, back when life had been simple. I scattered wildflower seeds across the scarred meadow where tents had once stood and campfires smoked. It felt symbolic, planting patience where there had been chaos, color where there had been noise. The dogs bounded after me, rolling in the soft dirt, tails wagging with a freedom I hadn't seen since before her invasion. The wind in the pines was back to its old rhythm, steady, unbroken. By evening, the local paper ran a story on the county's decision. The headline framed it as a cautionary tale of entitlement colliding with rural property rights. The comments poured in, most siding with me now. Reading them gave me a sense of closure, not courtroom closure, but community closure, the kind that says, we saw what happened, and we know who stood steady. After dark, I sat on the porch with a glass of whiskey, watching stars prick the black sky one by one. The dogs slept at my feet, breathing slow and even. I thought about the arc of the week: shock, escalation, spectacle, resistance, and now, at last, relief. What I felt wasn't just peace, but a hard-earned kind of peace. The kind you only get when you've defended something honestly, on your own terms. I thought again of my father's words, property is your spine. Tonight, those words settled deeper than ever. Near midnight, a lone car slowed at the county road, headlights sweeping the gate before rolling on. I didn't bother checking who it was. It didn't matter anymore. The gate stood strong, the cameras watched quietly, and the law was on my side. At sunrise, I climbed the highest ridge. The hills stretched for miles, painted gold in rows. For a moment, it felt like the land itself was acknowledging the end of a chapter. Standing there, boots firm on the earth, I understood it wasn't just ownership I had fought for, was belonging. By late afternoon, I sat once more on the porch with coffee in hand, watching a hawk wheel over the meadow. The seeds were hidden beneath the soil, but I knew they would rise. The dogs dozed in the warm quiet, the kind of quiet that isn't empty, but full. Karen would still be out there somewhere, reshaping her story, casting herself as misunderstood. But it no longer mattered. The facts were recorded. The restraining order was in place. The articles, the filings, the videos, all of it formed a lattice stronger than her theatrics could pierce. Whatever came next would play out in court, not at my gate. As the sun set on the 8th day, I raised my glass in a private toast to the land, to the dogs, to the long fight, and to the quiet victory. The sky deepened into midnight blue. The valley sank into silence, the silence that only comes after a storm has passed. And standing on my porch, I felt something settle in me. I hadn't just defended my land. I had reclaimed a part of myself. The meadow stretched before me like a blank page, ready for new growth, new seasons, a future unburdened by trespass and enriched by the lesson of standing firm. When I finally stepped inside and closed the door, the soft click sounded like a curtain falling quiet, final, absolute, and that's where I'll leave you. But tell me, if you were in my shoes, facing Karen's chaos, would you have stayed calm? Or snapped? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this saga, Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real-life HOA horror stories.